everybody. I appreciate you coming out this morning. Welcome to the inaugural Chamber Symposium. There's a bunch of new programming that we're trying to roll out. Part of this, as I try to explain to our members and staff and board, is kind of the highest peak here of trying to better understand our community, better understand our citizens. We love throwing festivals together and BB golf classics. But we also think there's a higher calling for chambers of commerce, there's a higher calling for institutions, there's a higher calling for the esteemed panels that we have here, and that is to have ongoing conversations. So we want to make sure that we bring that to the forefront. So welcome to the inaugural Chamber Symposium, Civic Discourse and Journalism. For those that don't know me, I think I know almost everybody here. My name is Matt Harrington. I have the honor and pleasure to serve as the Executive Director of the Southwestern Vermont Chamber. And I'm also honored to host and moderate today. So we have a slew of questions we want to walk through, and then of course, hopefully all of you became very interested in the topic. We'll in a moment, we'll introduce our panel, but we hope that you brought your questions too. And as you can see, smaller crowd, that's okay. It's Tuesday, 10 a.m., we're on the mountaintop. So we understand that. We find it such a privilege to be working with Stratton Mountain. And we're so excited to start that partnership today as a chamber, but we want to be back. So if you love this space, both encourage us to come back, but absolutely check out Emily and her staff for the variety of options that they have here at Stratton Mountain Resort. I also have the pleasure of welcoming up here in a moment Joshua Sherman. We reached out to his organization who publishes Stratton Magazine. That would make sense, right? Stratton Magazine up here at Stratton Mountain. And said, would you come alongside as a co-sponsor with us? He was gracious to do that. Dr. Joshua Sherman is the CEO of Old Mill Road Media, as the publisher of Stratton Mountain Magazine, but also Vermont Magazine, Manchester Life Magazine, Berkshire Magazine, Music in the Berkshires, and newly minted, the newly transformed The Guide as well. So I want to welcome up Joshua. Come up here. He's been a good friend of the chamber for many, many years now. I so appreciate him coming alongside. I know how important this topic is to him, so I just want him to say a couple words as the sponsor. Thanks, Josh.
So, hello everyone. When I was in 6th grade, the principal of our school decided to teach us all a valuable lesson. Privately, in confidence, he told one student, and only one student, that the school board had just voted on extending the school day to 4:30 p.m. dismissal instead of 3:30. As you can imagine, within less than an hour, the entire school and student body, grades 6 through 12, was in an uproar. We were outraged. Now, wisely, the headmaster had already scheduled a school-wide assembly for that afternoon, presumably to share the announcement and answer any concerns. We all walked in, angry, upset, frustrated, concerned, and frankly ready to fight. Interestingly, parents were there too. Long before cell phones, kids had called home to their parents, who also showed up. The principal stood at the lectern and smiled, and he calmly announced, "Today you all learned an important lesson. Gossip travels very fast. I shared false information intentionally with one student today, only one, and within less than 2 hours, here we are. Now, remember this always," he said. "Choose your words wisely, avoid gossip, and always question your source of information." Now, that was almost 35 years ago, but in today's vocabulary, early on, I learned about fake news. I also learned the very real truth that news travels fast, perhaps fastest, in very small communities. I certainly didn't know at 10 years old that I would end up the publisher of 6 different magazines and newspapers, but whether it's been in my medical career or in my work in media and music, I've always been very cautious to both research the facts before sharing information and making decisions. Now today we have an impressive panel gathered here to discuss the current state of the news, politics, the future of journalism, local journalism, and the responsibility of the media And before I hand it over to the guests, for what I suspect will be a thought-provoking and at times dark discussion, I would like to start the conversation on a positive note. While newspapers, magazines, and social media can certainly take any one of us down a dark rabbit hole, media can also inspire, it can reassure, it can drive economic growth, and it can share stories of positivity. Whether it's finding out about a new restaurant in town, a school fundraiser, or the anniversary of a multi-generational business, media has the power to share stories that can make you feel good. So while it can also inspire, even while tackling the darkest of subjects, a perfect example of this is Benjamin Lerner, one of our local staff writers in Old Mill Road, who just celebrated his 9th anniversary of sobriety. Benjamin shares his harrowing story of addiction and his incredible strength and recovery openly and on social media, in our publications, on our weekly radio show, and in his music. With over 150 million views and almost 400,000 followers, Benjamin has created a safe space for so many people to share their experiences, not just people dealing with addiction or recovery, but their family members, people who've lost someone they loved to addiction, to children who are trying to heal from the trauma of growing up with a parent who's been addicted. So at Old Mill Road, we aim to inspire, but that doesn't mean we avoid the truth. In fact, just the opposite. As I was taught in 6th grade, we always tell the truth, and that's why our publications have been trusted by our readers for decades. And long after I'm gone, I hope that that accountability still matters. Because remember, news travels fast, particularly in local journalism. So with that, I will hand the discussion over to today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you again, Joshua. This event is part of the Chamber's broader Vision 2027. You can read it over there on that pull-up, which aims to cultivate a vibrant regional economy driven by innovation and collaboration, where commerce thrives in harmony with our natural landscape and welcoming diverse communities. But to build that future, we must invest in our civic fabric. And as I mentioned earlier on, that's what we aim to do. The civic fabric of how we talk to one another, what stories we tell, how we engage in public life, and that's what we're here today to talk about. We find ourselves at a crossroads. Journalism, both local and national, is under pressure from all sides, technologically, politically, economically, and even public skepticism. At the same time, we've never needed trustworthy news and civic dialogue more than ever. How do we balance speed with truth? How do we sustain local journalism in our rural communities? And how do we as citizens contribute to a more respectful form of public discourse? Well, they have all the answers here today. We've gathered this incredible panel of thought leaders, both reporters, editors, professors, and public storytellers who are on the front lines of this conversation every day. So I'm going to go through our esteemed panel here, and please go around and applause after every single one of them, which is not normally what people tend to do. But first up, we have Judy Patrick. Many of you may know her as a panelist on WAMC's The Roundtable and Media Project. She's also Vice President of Editorial Development for the New York Press Association. A round of applause for Judy. Next to me on my right, we have Mike Aldens. Many of you may know a lot of his writing because he is the local part of this journal, super local journalist here with the Bennington Banner in Vermont News and Media. A round of applause for Mike. Seated to his right, we have Dr. Carrie Nickel. We thought it was very important to not just have people completely on the side of journalism and editors and journalists, but to bring in a professor of sociology, anthropology, and most importantly, social work at MCLA, and that is Dr. Carrie Nickel. So we welcome her to the panel. I have been paying attention, I think, to the Times Union. And, you know, the unique thing here in this kind of tri-state area in Bennington and Manchester and Stratton is, you know, most often people think in Vermont we get our news from Burlington, and all of us know tell the inside secret is we get most of our news from the capital region, the weather, the reports, things like that. And so I've been reading the Times-Union for many, many years now, so I have the deep honor of welcoming Casey Sealer here, Vice President and Editor of Times-Union. Thank you, sir. And finally, bringing up the reader, so to speak, and this I think was our last panelist that we reached out to. We were working with, we just felt like we needed one more, some depth, kind of a holistic view from both national and local and state. So we were very, very fortunate to get Joe Sexton, who's a contributor to the 7 Days, but formerly of the New York Times and ProPublica. Joe, welcome. And Joe. So we're going to hop right into it. We have kind of 4 different segments we want to move through, and we're going to ask questions, and then, as I said, we want to open up to everybody else. And I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to pass the mic. For the most part, there isn't any specific question I have for one or the other. There may be a couple that I have for Dr. Nickel, just from let's put a sociological bent on this. But segment 1 is going to be really the state of journalism. Then we're going to move into media and public opinion. Then we're going to move to the future of journalism. Finally, we've had a call with each one of these panels before, civic discourse. And so how do we thread that balance between, and kind of the pitch that Erica, who kind of came up with this idea here, having a symposium on journalism and civic discourse. We're both news junkies, and I come from a long line of news parents. But really kind of thinking about how do we take the amazing skill set of journalism, that 4th institution, the 4th estate, and what tools, what skills can they bring to a civic conversation? Things like Joshua brought up, checking your sources, holding both truths at the same time, things like that. So this 4th segment is going to be more around civic discourse, and we're going to ask them some questions around that. So with that, let's begin. And this is open to anybody. Maybe we go right down the line. I'll start with you, Mike, and then pass the mic. Let's really ground ourselves in the topic of the day. How would each of you describe the current state of journalism, both nationally, statewide, and locally?
Hey, everybody. Well, that's a loaded question this time of year. We find ourselves in a spot where more and more people don't know what to trust, where the facts come from, who's saying those facts, and so our job and what we strive to do is not necessarily tell both sides of the story, but to find out the truth as best we can. And sometimes that can be a little biased, one way or the other, depending on where you come from, but there's still out there a truth somewhere as best you can understand it. All these people here on this panel have been in that position to try and understand where that comes from. That means a lot of work. That means talking to both sides, or 3 sides, or 4 sides. That means putting the legwork in, knocking on those doors, not counting on what you heard, or what one person said, or what was online, or some other source. I think there are people, myself included, that this is still very, very important. I come from a long background in journalism, starting in New York City. Many, many years, and it's changed certainly, but the real important parts of our job hasn't changed. There are stories out there, there are human conditions out there that need to shed light on. Sometimes they're not pleasant, sometimes they're not things that people want to read, but they're important. And ultimately, we hold people in power to the truth. And if we can only do that as our primary thing, I think we've done a great job. And I still think that's out there, even with all the pressures that's happening right now.
Well, as the non-journalist on the panel, I guess I would, my outside perspective, I spend a lot of time with young people, and I think we need journalism with integrity more than ever. We need, my concerns in the time I spend with young people are trying to figure out how to support them in navigating the various media that they're exposed to, right? And I think that's becoming more and more true for all of us, not just young people. And so I guess, in response to the current state of journalism, I would say I have, kind of holding both hope that journalism can continue to be a voice with integrity that is, speaking some kind of truth. And at the same time, I hold a lot of fear that there are so many voices out there, so much media out there that people can go down these rabbit holes and that don't contain a lot of truth or contain a very specific truth. I'll stop there.
So let me give you a little bit of the inside view and a little bit of optimism. I think journalism as a profession that is in practice is so much better today than it was when I began 40, 45 years ago. The standards are higher, the ethics are higher, our ability to look outside conventional wisdom and cover diverse communities has increased exponentially over the years. I recently was a judge in a contest, a Missouri State newspaper contest, and I can't tell you how wonderful it was to see the number of small newspapers and the variety of really interesting stories, hard-hitting stories. Part of this is, the people who practice the profession are really into it. They work 80-hour weeks. They have like Casey who mows his lawn in the dark because he is working so much.
It also was hot.
And it's very hard. But part of our advances are in part due to the availability of digital services. We can, instead of running down to a courthouse to get a decision by a judge, we can just pull it up online. We can get our press releases by email. We can do so much digitally, and it makes things more efficient. The problem, and it's a big one, is the fact that journalists today tend to stay in the office too much or try to do too much by email, by text, by surfing the web. So one of our challenges going forward is to get our journalists out in the community. There are many, many challenges we face when it comes to our business model and capturing the attention of an audience that seems to be going in 100 different directions at once. But in terms of the profession, in terms of the real people out there doing the real work, I've never been more proud to say that I was a journalist.
I was a judge in the same contest, the Missouri, we were both tapped. And it was, I agree, it was completely inspiring to see the good work that was getting done by papers both large and small, especially on pushing kind of transparency stories and pushing back against officials and holding institutions to account using transparency laws and the available resources to them. So that's the good news. The bad news is that journalism is, I am about to turn 58, and journalism today is more stressed than it's ever been in my lifetime. Again, going from kind of the long term to sort of the shorter term. The long term, of course, is that the creating the new digital economy for journalism is probably a multi-generational undertaking. We are trying to transition from print to digital. The fact of the matter is that the print, because the stock is so limited and the audience is kind of more selective, is still more profitable than digital, where in terms of advertising, the stock on the shelves, as it were, is endless. So we are, as the expression goes, trading digital, we're trading print dollars for digital pennies in terms of advertising revenue. The papers and the media institutions that are navigating that successfully are well resourced. And the problem is that because a number of newspapers and newspaper chains were sometimes too slow to embrace digital, they are stressed. If they are accountable to Wall Street, they are even more stressed. That is why I used to work at the Burlington Free Press and GNAT-TV. I worked there from 94 to 2000, and I enjoyed working there. I'm really glad I'm not working there today, because GNAT, or whatever it is called today, it's going through several different names, is up against it. Not as up against it as papers, including several in the capital region, that are owned by rapacious hedge funds that have stripped those papers down from parts. So that is the kind of central long-term economic problem. Shorter term, we are still dealing with the fact that anybody with a cell phone essentially has the throw that we used to think of people who own a printing press as having. And we have not yet caught up with education on media literacy and other larger kind of civic virtues. And so we do have a generation that is trying to navigate this kind of information ecosystem and is sometimes having a difficult time with it, which is not to say it's only young people who are having that difficulty by any stretch of the imagination. And in the kind of shorter term, we are dealing with the fact that there is an entire political movement that is built around tearing down many institutions, but sees the media as an antagonistic force that needs to be taken down. And what I always say is that the media is not the enemy of the people, to borrow a phrase used by both Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump, but the media is incontrovertibly the enemy of bullshit artists. And that is a position that we are finding ourselves in at siege, as it were, from various factors.
What role do you see as kind of a local paper, even a regional paper, play that national news can't?
Well, it's fairly simple. The New York Times is not going to cover our select board. If there's something happening in our community that doesn't make the national news, it's still really important to people. It is something about knowing that 3 blocks over or in the next neighborhood, if something happens, you might know somebody who knows that person. What's really important? We can all look at the Times and television and see what's happening in Iran and see what's happening with tariffs and stuff. But until we see and figure out how it affects us on a daily basis and what it means to our lives and our families' lives, then it kind of gets put in the wash. Yes, it's important, of course, but what happens in our daily lives has always been really important, and really what newspapers have been about. That doesn't mean that there aren't situations where people might not want to see that stuff. I'll tell a quick example. I was invited on a police raid, a drug police raid, last summer, and I got out of the police car. The police were in full riot gear. They're marching up a door. They've got a battering ram with them. And I noticed that in my eye, and I started as a photojournalist in New York. There was a whole bunch of 5 and 6 and 7-year-old kids with no shirts on, and they had no shoes on, and they just stopped, and they were standing there watching as maybe 20 feet away, these guys are coming in with these semi-automatic guns and AK-47s and all that stuff. People were getting pulled out of the house. One guy ran onto the roof of the building and had to be, the dogs were there. And I took that picture, and we caught a lot of crap for that, honestly, because people were like, oh, you're traumatizing these kids. And I say to them, and it was a really important part of our community discussion, was these kids see this every day. They live next to this every day. And until we're willing as a community to see what's actually happening in our community, then what are we doing? So taking that picture forced everybody to look at that. And I was grateful that I had an editor that was willing to write an editorial a couple of days later about why that was important. And I think that ability on a local level to explain what's happening in our community and to show what's happening, the good and the bad, the restaurant openings and the best pizza in 5 blocks, or this drug raid. So I think that local media is the heart of journalism, and then it extends out to our greater world.
Maybe I was going to take that.
So we should also think a little bit about what local newspapers used to do that they don't do anymore, and what you've lost. One of the things you've lost are weddings, engagements, births, obituaries. I mean, you get some obituaries, but you don't get them all. You don't get the school lunch menus. I mean, a lot of these things you can get online, but you can't get them all online. Local newspapers have served as a way of bringing the community together and serving a little bit about gossip. I mean, my local newspaper, the British Journal, used to do little personal items. I bet the papers in Vermont and Massachusetts did as well, where, you know, Joe and Martha Smith visited so-and-so at the lake on Saturday. And going back, I can find my great-grandmother doing things at the lake on a certain summer afternoon. So it's a sense of our collective vision of what our community is. It also brings the community together in a way Facebook doesn't. I mean, there are times when something happens in my town, I don't know about it, and I'll see a little bit about it on Facebook, but I don't know whether it's the whole story. We also have to think about how local a local newspaper is, because our regional paper can write comprehensive stories of regional interest. But if you want the local news about whether or not your town has approved the expansion of your school, I mean, that's not going to get covered unless you have a truly local newspaper. And those are one of the things that have gone by the wayside. I mean, it's been happening since the 1950s, so I can't blame it all on the internet.
Yeah, the Times-Union is a regional paper, and increasingly we're trying to cover more of the Hudson Valley because we recognize that there are readers there who, because of a lot of the things I was talking about, the kind of diminution of a lot of corporate newspapers and the winnowing of a lot of hyper-local newspapers, we saw a readership there, a potential market there, and our Hudson Valley crew is doing great work. They're not trying to go to every school board meeting or town council meeting. A lot of the things that newspapers used to do, the really wonderful stuff like births and weddings, they also used to run police blotters, and some of them still do, because it's really easy cut and paste journalism if you are owned by a rapacious hedge fund. Judy knows what I'm talking about. And we used to run police blotters, and you know, many people in the audience are probably familiar with them. It is literally just a report on who the police cited, arrested, you know, scooped up for DUI in the preceding couple of days and nights. Now, we are still cleaning up the mess of all of those police blotters and minuscule stories on minor crimes that were posted online for more than a decade. And people will call us up and say, I got arrested on DUI back in 2012. When you search for my name, that is still up. And we now have a process in place to de-index those stories, which means that we essentially waive the digital magic wand and they're no longer responsive to a Google search, for example. We will ask people to sign a waiver saying, hey, this is the best we can do. I understand that this is not a perfect prophylactic to remove it from the web. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to do to ameliorate a lot of the kind of hyper-local things that we used to do in print. One thing that we are still doing is we publish what we call deeds and deals, which is information about real estate transactions. For the same reason, we will frequently get people who reach out and say, when you Google my name, my house sale from 9 years ago will pop up on the web. That's still my address. I don't like the fact that it's that readily available. Of course, people will say, I've got an order of protection against my ex-husband. Please take this down. We always take it down. Maybe a year ago, faced with sort of a flurry of these requests, we said, you know what? Maybe we'll take the names out of deeds and wills. In other words, we'll have the addresses so people can see how home sales are doing in their neighborhood, but we'll take the names out. Oh my God, the hue and cry that we heard from people saying, no, I want the names included in that listing. I want to know who my neighbors are, which I think goes to the heart of what people want and expect from local news. They want to see their community reflected to the greatest extent that they can see it. When they see reality to that level reflected in local news, they are more likely to trust the media. What every survey says is that folks who distrust the media, when you dig down, they are talking about national media that obviously is remote and unknowable to them. When it gets down to the local level, they might still have disagreement with their local outlets. They might hate the editorial board, as many people do with the Times Union's editorial board, but they tend to have more trust in local media.
I don't think I have anything to add.
All right.
We had a lot of questions to go.
Do you have 4 more expert panelists here?
Yeah, Mike's got to add.
Yeah. I forgot to mention also, sometimes a local paper can recognize the patterns that could go unnoticed otherwise. For instance, I cover courts and police a lot, and we really started noticing a real uptick in domestic violence over the course of many months. And we were able to, as a newspaper, come together and try and figure out what are some of the causes, talk to the people in the area, the experts, we talk to the police, we talk to the homeless shelters, we talk to domestic violence people who deal with victims all the time. And we were able to pull back and say, okay, this is happening. What are some of the things that are the reasons why it's happening? And that whole awareness thing wouldn't have happened had we not been covering those little small stories. So local newspapers can do that, where other bigger papers that have longer responsibilities for the larger picture of things as far as national and international sometimes can't recognize those patterns. And these are things that matter to people on the ground, letting them know that there's help out there as well.
I'm going to have you pass Dr. Nickel there. Carrie, from your perspective, sociologist, educator, how has the changing nature of journalism affected civic knowledge and engagement, especially as we look at kind of the young cohorts, the students? How does this impact them as they've kind of watched in real time sort of the breakdown, as we mentioned?
Judy and I were talking before we got started just about some of the trends that I've seen over the 11 years that I've been at MCLA, and in recent years I find that it takes me much deeper into the semester to get students okay with actually talking to each other. There's a lot, I don't know that young people are spending more time by themselves than they used to, but they definitely can have access to a lot of information and communication tools without being together in a physical, human sort of way. And I do think that can impact the way that they are able to interpret and make sense of media, right? So if they are not engaging in conversation with people who are reading different things than they are, or paying attention to different sources of media than they are, I think it becomes easier and easier to isolate and get sucked down those rabbit holes of one particular perspective, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that would be my primary answer of the things that I've been seeing, and just the need for more of that connection, more of the connection that I think journalism and media can bring, and that we need shared community spaces as well to make that more accessible to people. people, so that we're not all, whether we're young people or older people sitting at home just taking in all of the news on our own and trying to process it all. Where are we having the opportunities to have those conversations with other people, whether they're people who think like we do or not? They might have a different experience, they might have a different source of information that can add something to that, to the perspective that we've got. So, yeah, I think that would be
Well, you pass it over to Judy, because it's kind of a follow-up question. When we hear a lot about media bias and echo chambers, what do you, in your opinion, and again, other panelists, please hop on, what is the media's role in shaping public opinion today?
It's interesting. So we try to present the information. We try to give our readers, our viewers, our listeners information and try to let them make their own decisions. But let me be clear, we have done this before, and it comes usually from on high. When we talk about DWI, for example, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a push by activists, by people who wanted the drunk driving laws changed, for us to write every drunk driving story, and it pushed, and we did. The newspapers did. We would we still write DWIs, especially if they're about fatalities. But at the time, there were a lot of DWI stories on the front page. I mean, in part, it was pressure from advocacy groups to do that, and studies have analyzed this and has shown that because of the newspaper or the media coverage, those laws did change. So the media did play a role. How conscious or unconscious it was is another issue. There is what's the other issue there? Oh, well, when we cover cops, we cover a lot of crime, and we put a crime on the cover. You know, we want to beat down crime. We want to live in safe communities. But if a newspaper covers crime too much, you give the impression that your city is crime-ridden. If you have a really good crime reporter, a cops reporter, who is generating tons of really interesting copy because crime stories are interesting stories, you can give the false impression that your town is crime-ridden. And so I think that's something the editors have to moderate or have to be very cognizant of.
Yeah, I mean, it's the responsibility of journalists who work on the news side to provide people with the facts on the ground. Whether it's a drug arrest or what's going on at the state capitol or the county legislature, to provide people with accurate, well-context information so they can make up their own minds about what's going on in their communities. My paper has a very robust opinion section. We believe that it is also a role of the newspaper to express an institutional point of view that is separate, that is walled off to the extent that it can be from the news side, to express opinions on the issues of the day, whether they are local, regional, statewide, or national. You are seeing a number of papers, the Washington Post and the New York Times, kind of most famously sort of pulling back from that role in certain ways. The New York Times has taken a lot of heat just over the course of the last 10 days because last summer they said they were no longer going to do local political endorsements, and then they did this piece about a week ago, which was clearly meant to be sort of non-endorsement in the Democratic mayoral primary that was happening today in New York City. And I very honestly, our editorial board ended up, the editorial board was so outraged by that piece and the Times Union had covered Andrew Cuomo, who is, if you believe the polls, the leading candidate in that primary. We were moved to do a piece saying, for any New York City voters who read the Times Union, do not rank Andrew Cuomo. We got heat from it, we got praise for it. So if people can use the editorial, the editorials that appear in the Times Union as a wall to bounce their own, hopefully well-informed opinions off of. So,
Yeah,
I want to say something.
it was going back to you anyways.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, again, maybe I'll just repeat myself. There are a fair number of studies about just how the human mind works. And, one of the things that it most seeks is, this kind of validation of your own point of view. And so the idea that at this late date in our evolution, whatever, news organizations can do much to truly shape public opinion. I think what it chiefly does is magnify people's points of view and positions. The single most popular source of news in the country is Fox News. And one could argue that as a propaganda machine, which is effectively what it is very powerful to some degree in shaping public opinion. Or it's a very powerful way of amplifying, already held points of view. And so, I don't know, I'm a little bit of, people who are reading the New York Times editorials are people who come to those editorials fully expecting what they will read. That they're, we're in favor of action on climate change, discrimination, anyway. So I'm a bit of a skeptic about the power of the press to actually shape public opinion anymore, to the extent that
Let's keep it with you, Joe, but this is going to go to all the panelists. With the rise of AI, so kind of on that theme, that thread of the fourth estate may or may not have the actual power to influence public opinion. We see an emergence of these new technologies, AI, Substack, podcasting, enter your new technology, whatever you're using for the future of journalism. Just talk to us a little bit. Do you find that news and or really information sharing and storytelling is fragmented? Is it more democratic because of those technologies? Or is it something completely new and different?
Well, I don't want to be a jerk. But tempted as I am, naturally as it comes to me. No, I don't know fuck all about AI, and I don't even understand it. So for me to, kind of opine about what its implications are for the news business, like I said, I'm checking out of this life in short order. So that'll be for somebody else to figure out. And again, I'm trying to follow the question, but there have been obviously an explosion in sources of information these days, and I don't see how that is anything as hard other than a fundamental good. Kids' exposure to information, they have more access to information than any generation ever. And if anyone really believes that there used to be a great population of young people in America who sat down and read their daily newspapers every morning, not in my household or in my generation. Like I said, the exposure to information is to me a fundamental good. The greater the variety of it, bring it on. It takes stewardship. It takes stewardship as parents and teachers to guide young people about their consumption of it, and what can be trusted, and how to themselves explore and undertake the hard work of figuring out what's true, what's not, what's trustworthy and what isn't. And so struck by how little the news folks in Vermont have exploited all of the, opportunities and technologies and, I think going back to one of the earliest points, the quality of faithful reporting today is so exponentially greater than it ever was. And yet I don't really see much evidence, in the Vermont environment that that's being fully exploited or maximized.
Okay, so somebody discourse on Joe. Okay.
What's
Somebody
that?
argue. Argue the other say.
I was hoping you were going to say, oh, come on, Android intelligences have always been with us, and, but it's no different from back in the 70s, Androids that know everything and interact with us as if they're real individuals. But, yeah, I don't think anybody knows the kind of the full extent of what AI is going to do to, what we laughingly refer to as legacy media these days. But the Times Union was a Hearst newspaper. Hearst signed an agreement with OpenAI that was essentially a peace treaty whereby OpenAI could use Hearst content, all the magazine journalism, all the newspaper journalism, to train its large language models. We have been encouraged to responsibly experiment and use AI. Obviously, we do that very, very carefully. And whenever AI is used in a way that gets into our public-facing journalism, we acknowledge it. We have a news quiz that we do every week. The news quiz is constructed by an AI that looks for the top 10 stories of the week and builds 10 questions around them. And it's pretty good. And obviously, an editor always edits that stuff to make sure it's not inappropriate or sort of a fun question about a homicide or something like that. And that works pretty well, but it's acknowledged, online, which is where the news quiz lives. About a week and a half ago, the Saturday that included these terrible killings in Minnesota, as well as the No Kings protest, my managing editor for news, Susan Mahalik, asked ChatGPT, which we've been encouraged to use, to experiment with, give me a list of political assassinations. And it offered up a list going back to Abraham Lincoln and up to JFK and onwards. And then it said, would you like me to put that in a graphic timeline? And Susan said, sure, that would be great. And what it gave her was a complete mess, absolutely lunatic. The photos, like Malcolm X looked more like the sort of JFK married to, I don't know who. And it made up names. It made up names of assassins and gave the assassins to the wrong victims. It was just completely loony. And
It just got crossed up with the news quiz.
I don't think so. I think it literally lost its mind. It's like if somebody worked in your house and they said, would you like me to take the dog for a walk? And you were like, yeah, sure. And so the robot took your dog around the block, and then you're like, would you like me to feed the dog? Yeah, sure, do that. And it feeds the dog into the blender or something like that. And then finally, very quickly, I had the very weird experience of asking ChatGPT for an analysis of my own journalism and career. Have you ever tried that?
I have not.
You must try it. It is really weird because I don't know if it was very complimentary or what, but I was like, yeah, ChatGPT seems to really understand me. I really appreciate it.
So AI is a pretty useful tool to do some of the mundane tasks that can slow a newsroom down, like writing a short headline or giving us headline suggestions. If you're a really good copy editor, sometimes those headlines are easy to write. If you're not, and there are many people who are not, AI will give you suggestions and something to work on. Okay, it sounds like Casey's doing all the good things. The AI is only it's garbage in, garbage out. It only scrapes what's out there. It's not scraping a lot of local newspapers because a lot of them aren't online or they're online in a same human quality, I guess I should say. They're full of adjectives. There's a sameness to them. I encourage you, if someone that you care about dies, write the obituary yourself, and you can see the difference. The future in our industry, I think, is bright. We need to embrace it to do mundane tasks, but you always are going to need a Casey there to make sure that it doesn't run wild, because I'm sure you come across instances every time you pull up your Google search engine of crazy things that AI or your Google, hey Google, tell me this, it'll tell you something that's so off, it's so wrong. Even Elon Musk earlier this week or maybe last week said he was going to redo because there were so many mistakes in how his AI was operating. So it's new. I think it's a little bit overrated, but it has some capabilities. I have bees, and one of the things that I find that it can do that seems like a really good idea, AI can check the hive for mites. The mites are the things that cause colony collapse, and you can have a machine lift it up and get rid of the mites and put it back. That's what AI should do. It should stay out of the news business.
I'm going to disagree with Joe on the former point. I kind of miss the days when I did read the New York newspapers, and all my friends read the newspapers. And in fact, I was in the generation where we had just a handful of stations, and I remember going to school and talking to people about what we saw that night. And it was a bit of a community that we've lost over the years. Yes, it's great to have a lot of opposing news sources, but there's also something lost from that community feel of having a Walter Cronkite kind of guy, or reading the Daily News on your breakfast table, and talking about sports and talking about what happened that night, SummerSlam, stuff like that. We all share that. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. And AI, I'm a visual artist. I did a lot of photojournalism, and that scares me a little bit to know that I was online the other day, and they had old pictures of Ulysses Grant and Lincoln, and the video from the AI brought them to life, and they were talking, and they were, and it looked really pretty good. And I can imagine that at some point people are going to challenge people's authenticity of what's real and what's not real in a photo. I mean, I remember when I was coming up, we had a lot of talks about Photoshop and what can and can't be done, what the standards are, how not to alter something. And to have AI so good that someone can be easily tricked into thinking that somebody was doing something in a riot that really didn't happen, or a police officer did something, or a protester did something. I think we sometimes go into the vein of wanting to confirm what we already believe. It's very easily to look at that stuff and say, you see what happened? See that's what happened. So I think we have to be, as newspaper people and journalists, really careful about that stuff. So.
Give me back that mic.
Oh, it's on.
Well, I do think, one of the things, you're charming and warm recollection of, reading the paper, whatever, right? One of the things journalists are famous for doing is taking their own experience with that, with wider world. Right? You got into the racket. Of course you read newspapers as a kid. That's why you're here, right? But the vast majority of folks were not. They were, making much more lucrative careers. Anyway, the other thing is, again, we do have this, tendency to sort of recall it. Well, there was a more trustworthy time, right? Walter Cronkite was there. The New York Times was publishing the Pentagon Papers. Well, again, there were a bunch of white dudes running newsrooms that were full of, homophobes and racists and sexist. So just be careful about getting too nostalgic about what we missed from what I think we convinced ourselves was a more trustworthy and safe world.
There's a lot of, I don't know if anybody either has gone to Broadway and paid top dollar or just saw it on CNN, Good Night and Good Luck, the George Clooney stage production based on his movie. And it's been wildly popular, probably for a lot of reasons, but I think one of those is that kind of longing for that pre-lapsarian age when, media daddy take care of us. And yeah, I completely agree. And speaking as a journalist who grew up, watching All the President's Men, and then ended up getting to work with Harry Rosenfeld, who was played by Jack Warden in the movie, and was the editor of the Times Union through the 80s into the 90s, and was still around as sort of a senior editor and commentator, and he was on the editorial board. And Harry had no rose-colored glasses on what that era was like. He had a storied career, but at the same time, he battled against corporate ownership and bean counters throughout his career. It was in no way a kind of flossy one at the time.
Great. I will encourage our panelists to face forward, because this is the audience that you're talking to, not against one another. All right, a couple more questions. We want to delve into the civic discourse part, but we want to provide some time, and we are getting shorter on time. But I do want to ask anybody for this, and maybe all of you, how can we all help support ethical, sustainable journalism in our communities? That could be region, state, or local. How can we help you? How can we support that ethical, sustainable model?
For as much as that's possible, is just getting involved and speaking your mind, reaching out when you have a problem with something we've done or disagree. Of course, reading the stuff always helps. Buying the newspaper, watching the video, it's all important. We're not supermen here. And superwomen. We're trying to do a good job. We sometimes miss stuff. Reaching out, I've had so many contacts with people in our community that just reached out to let me know if something was not exactly the way I presented it, or maybe to give me a hint on, hey, there's something happening with something here. I think the more we can get people involved in all levels, the better it's always going to be. The more light gets shined on the different subjects.
Read the stories, listen to the stories, subscribe to the newspapers, as many as you can, become members of nonprofit organizations that promote journalism. There's a number of national and international organizations that work to protect reporters who are at risk of physical injury or imprisonment. Share content that you enjoy on social media. Talk about the content you see with your friends and neighbors. And if a reporter calls you for a story, return the call. And if you know of some news, call us. That's the best news comes in through the phone line, or for reaching out to a reporter directly and telling them about it.
Yeah, I mean, if there is a robust news organization, robust by your lights as a news consumer, support that entity. And I would say the smaller it is, the more important your support is. I spoke before about the change in sort of the ad revenue portion of our business. That means that what we call consumer revenue, meaning subscription dollars, and even just single copy sales of the paper is more important now than it has been in probably ever, because advertising used to underwrite so much of the journalism. So whether it is a for-profit or a non-profit media entity, if you value it, support it with your dollars. That is important. And engage with it. Reach out and let the journalists know what you like and what you don't like. Don't be a troll, but it is both a business if it's for profit, but also a resource that is there to serve an engaged community of news consumers.
I forgot something really important. Support the advertisers. I mean, I talked to the Chamber Group and I forgot that. Support the advertisers. I mean, support the local business. That is an initiative as long as a source of revenue for us, but it's more important than that, it's part of your community. Sorry about that.
Yeah, just support the advertisers, and when you go to that business, in other words, if you're going to your local liquor store because you saw their supplement in the paper, tell them you're doing them a favor because it shows how you get information, and goodness knows it supports the paper because it encourages them to keep advertising.
So when it first became possible that Donald Trump could become president, I took to say the following that while it was not an outcome I would wish for, if he was elected and you could be assured that the nuclear missiles would stay in their silos, that it might actually be an interesting reckoning for our country, right? For us to discover, like, who are we, really? We've told ourselves so many myths about ourselves over the years and decades and centuries. And I think he has had that effect, and the reckoning has been, at least from my point of view, deeply dispirited about who we are as a nation. And I have the same thought about news, which is, having had the economic model for newspapers collapse so spectacularly, imperiling much of it, what is the real American appetite for news? We like to tell ourselves, journalists especially, that it's an invaluable thing and it's it's essential to safe and functioning democracy. But genuinely, what is the American appetite for news as we understand it? And I think it's an open question today, because certainly people haven't risen to say, like, well, I'm just going to subscribe and I'll get more subscriptions for, pour their money into many of the, quite impressive and I think ultimately triumphant nonprofit versions of news organizations. So to me, it's an outstanding question, but a real one about, what if the end of classified ads could have had such a profound economic impact, I'm like, is that really all we were buying newspapers for? That's a disturbing question that I'm not sure I have the answer.
And yet, 7 Days, which is a terrific, alternative paper. I worked for the Free Press when 7 Days began. We were discussing this, and I used to read 7 Days, but because I was in competition with it, because I was the entertainment editor at the Free Press, but also because it had all the ads, for, the entertainment ads of who was coming to the clubs, the theaters, more so than the Free Press, than my own section would get. We would get some of those, but not all of those. But I grew up in the great age of all weeklies, and you would read those for the ads. It was content that people love so much. But I resources to bring them a portrait of their community that, imperfect and incomplete as it is on a day-to-day basis, is something that they value. I do hear that, along with the bitching and moaning and complaining. So,
Yeah, I mean, to maybe go back to the question about what keeps you up at night. I mean, I will say that, you know, the implications of this current administration, it has, to me, its threat to newspaper or journalism is that it has seemingly obliterated the essential news role of like exposing scandal, right? That used to be one of the great powers of the press, right? Uncover a political scandal, a business scandal, the notion of scandal has just been destroyed. Like, it doesn't, right? We have a president twice impeached, you know, 4 times indicted, who is, I think, just sort of destroyed the idea that the idea of exposing scandal can have consequences. And, you know, I think maybe on a very local level, there's still possibly can expose, you know, whatever, you know, abusive police chief or a pedophile legislator or whatever. You know, I suspect that will still ultimately the community will, you know, exact some accountability.
outrage has happened.
Not entirely, but certainly nationally. But I was just watching a documentary the former mayor of Toronto.
I saw that.
Rob Ford, whatever. I mean, he was his own kind of Trump in Toronto. And again, it was sort of evidence that, like, you know, through a certain mix of, you know, bullying and lying and menacing, you know, you can just sort of, you know, nullify the threat of scandal.
That's down. As we kind of wrap up, I just want to
make sure that people can't hear us. We've got civic discourse, and when we were on the panel call, thank you also for bringing up advertising too. Not that the Chamber of Commerce is always about advertising. I was having a conversation with a business owner the other day, they said, how, you know, we're looking for this line chef, you know, how can we possibly get a job listing out to people who've tried Indeed? And I said, have you tried the Bennington banner? Which is always my kind of like, yes, there's multiple ways we can do this. You kind of need a shotgun approach when you're talking about where the workforce is these days and how to capture them. But we have always found, in our own little world, the guide and the banner and the journal just to be a really great, smaller resource for a local community. And they were like, I had never thought about that. So it's just amazing to think of, even just in the little generation that I've been at the Chamber, the change in the advertising model, and just not the thought to go and support your local paper. But I appreciate that there are many models to support your paper, advertising being one of them. But as we get into the civic discourse part, and I do want to open it up to questions, so this will be our last question. But when we were talking at the panel, as I said in the beginning, it was about journalism. How do you have that civic dialogue? But then as we look out into our communities and our citizenships and our trolls on Facebook and our neighbors who don't mow their yard or whatever, you know, as we start to see if it's not erosion, as we start to see the temperature rise in our own neighborhoods against one another, how can we bring together a panel of experts who have used tools for decades about how to thread the line, how to report both sides? And so my question goes out to each one of you, if you'd be willing to answer. What are tips, tools, tactics that we could go out as an audience with our community that you have used for the many, many years to assuage the temperature, to turn down the dial, and or to show truth in your own papers or media? So Mike, we'll start with you. Hopefully this thing is
start there, we'll go around, and then think of a question or two that you might want to ask.
I think it comes down to giving people just a voice. I am guilty, Joe, of being still a person who believes in the better natures of our human spirit, and that people want to get along with their neighbors on a local level. On any given block, there's going to be people who disagree. I try to knock on doors and talk to those people. We had a kid, not a kid, he's a guy. His name was Max Mish. He's a known. He associates with the white nationalist movement. He has been arrested many times. I talked to him and continue to talk to him about how he's feeling about things, and as well as the other parts of the community. And I think in just a little way, giving people some sort of a voice that's not just one-sided can go a long way in trying to bring down that temperature just a little bit, at least understanding what the person believes. I know it's probably hokey, but I still strive to do that.
One of the hats that I wear is dialogue facilitator. So it's one of the areas of training that I have. And when we talk to students initially about how dialogue is different than, say, debate or other forms of communication, we talk a lot about listening. And we talk about listening in a particular way, which is listening to understand, as opposed to listening to respond. I think I can't speak for everyone, but I know that I have been socialized in a world where when someone is talking to me, what's usually going through my mind is, what am I going to say next? How am I going to counter what they're telling me if I disagree with them, or what's a good story I can tell that will contribute to this conversation? And it takes some conscious effort to actually listen to what someone's saying with the goal of really understanding what it is they're saying. We also talk about, the goal of dialogue is not necessarily to come to some shared agreement. And it's not to prove the other person wrong. It really is to try to understand. And so another one of the tips that I usually give students is to try as best you can to approach those conversations with a spirit of curiosity and inquiry, right? Where you're asking questions rather than combating a person's view, right? Trying to understand, what makes you think that? What experiences have led you to that conclusion, right? Because we do all have different experiences, and there are sometimes reasons that people think things that don't necessarily convince me that I agree with them, but they help me to understand why they might think the way they do. And if they can take the same approach and maybe understand why I think the way I do, again, we might not come to some shared agreement, but we're at least going to be able to see each other as human beings who are more complex than just this one view that we have of some issue in the world. So I think those are some of the things we try to focus on when I'm working with students and other groups around dialogue is, you don't have to go into every conversation trying to win. Sometimes that is the approach you need to take in a certain situation, right? And there are also times when, if the topic of the conversation is something that is very personal to someone, that it can be really hard to approach something with a spirit of inquiry and trying to understand someone who might have a view that is very hurtful to you, right? So I don't think that's always an approach that can be taken, but I do think it's an approach that can help us to cross some of those divides and at the very least see each other as human beings more.
my advice to reporters always was to listen. You don't learn anything by talking. Keep your mouth shut and listen. Don't be defensive. It's very hard for journalists to break that. Well, my story was perfectly fine. No, I didn't make a mistake. No, don't be defensive. Don't be condescending. But there are going to be opportunities for you to come back at, especially on social media, when you see something that's wrong. And so what do? Do you just let that pass, or do you step up and respond to it in some way? And so my approach has always been to provide, to fact check it, to make sure that I know what I'm talking about, and to provide a reliable source of counter information, and post it, and not with a look at, here's the real news, you nitwit. No, that's not the right approach. You just say, just post it and let it lie. And I think that sometimes can make inroads with people. It doesn't always do it, but the only way you in your own mind are going to get ahead of this, to understand it better, is if you listen. And please keep in mind that both sides can be wrong. Be open to the idea that, just because you think that one meme is hilarious, and that it too may be bad misinformation or disinformation. It's coming from both sides. It's coming from one side more than the other, but I've seen liberal misinformation as well. So before you disseminate that, just keep your own biases in check.
My predecessor at the Times Union, Rex Smith, I think he was the one who had a really good idea to, in the editorial conference room where we meet to plot out, the day's plan, the next day's print edition, painted, or had somebody paint, the four kind of key tenets of the Society of Professional Journalists ethical code, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4. Seek the truth and report it fully. Act independently. Minimize harm and be accountable. The vast number of editorial discussions that we have turn on one or maybe a combination of those tenets. The one that I think we've spoken about a lot, which certainly Judy touched on, is be accountable. And that just means when people call you up to write or to discuss something, hear them out. The codicil to that is you are not a punching bag. Journalists are not punching bags. We are there to be accountable. We are not there to be abused. And it is okay to say, thanks for calling. I think this conversation is over. It is also okay if you get a couple of emails from somebody who is clearly just, is the chimpanzee flinging his poo, through the bars of the cage. It's okay to block that person and send them into the digital network world.
All right. I feel like I need to explain myself a little bit. Maybe I've been misunderstood. I am a fucking optimist about the future of journalism. I like to say all journalists all reporters are thieves. Right? We steal each other's story ideas, and we steal each other's writing styles, and most egregiously when they give out big awards or whatever, journalists do nothing better than give out awards to each other. We steal credit for them. So I've been in practice thief my entire career. And one of the things I like to do is steal the good lines from colleagues. So I had a great colleague at the New York Times, Judy Wire, legendary columnist. He worked at at least three of the major newspapers in New York, Newsday, the Daily News, and the Times. And Jim had this great line, and it's at the heart of my optimism, which is that he believes that there are three great, inextinguishable human desires. The need for food, the need for sex, and the need for stories. People want to tell stories, people want to hear stories. They want to hear stories of outrage and stories of miracles and stories of tragedy and stories of accountability. That desire will never go away, and in that belief, that I believe there's a future for what we do in telling stories of consequence and impact and tenderness and beauty. So I am an optimist. But the world can get you down. And I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Lost Sons of Omaha. And it was about a killing in the streets of Omaha in the days after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. And a young African-American kid wound up shot to death by a white bar owner in the downtown district of Omaha. And it became for me a paradigm of a broken America. The white bar owner, there was a sort of instant online vigilante movement portraying the white bar owner as a white supremacist who had killed this, murdered this young African American kid. Each of the characters, the white bar owner, the young black kid, were turned into caricatures. A prosecutor initially declined to charge the white bar owner. The vigilantes had their way, and the new prosecutor came in and indicted the bar owner, who was a 38-year-old ex-Marine who had won a presidential medal for valor in Iraq. And on the eve of ultimately surrendering to face this new set of charges by a second prosecutor, shot himself in the head. Anyway, so there's a lot of parts of broken America, criminal justice system that had left a 22-year-old African-American kid as angry as he was at a world of injustice. A ex-Marine who had served with courage and conviction, who went mostly untreated for traumatic brain injuries after his service in Iraq. Questions of gun control, questions of racial mistrust, questions of a weaponized internet. Anyway, it's a nice book. I have copies outside. But anyway, I find myself at an occasional book event, and people would say, "Would you sign my book for me?" I say, "Well, what do I have to say in this thing?" So I came upon this idea that I think, with this long-winded answer, gets to your question. And I would write it in the books. Question, believe, do both at once. And what I mean by that is, be skeptical, it's a great quality. Challenge orthodoxy, do your own work to vet what you're reading, and so but believe that there is an actual truth, and that you can get to it. Believe in the basic goodness of people. So, I don't know how it ran with you folks, but I come to kind of like it. Question, believe, do both at once.
Try and hear you, and then we'll pass it back. Let's try and be somewhat short. We are running out of time. Representative James, Kathleen James.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for being here. Really great conversation. I spent most of my career as a journalist, and now I'm a state rep. And what I find social media to be best at is spreading inaccurate information, stoking anger and resentment, and fueling division. And the power and speed and amplification of that does feel different to me, I think, than how journalism has maybe been over the course of our history, just because of the sheer megaphone aspect. And the only area where I've been able to find real traction is in one-on-one dialogue with the folks I represent. So coffee hours, knocking on doors, seeing people who are really pissed off on Facebook and calling them. Do you guys see any way, I was trying to draw a Venn diagram earlier, do you see any sliver of intersection between the incredibly important role of accurate, impartial journalism in our democracy and the power of one-on-one dialogue? Like, besides share our stories online, how do you give journalism that same juice?
I'll try that one a little bit. Part of the, as an editor, I had the same issue if someone would write me a scathing email or leave me a vicious voicemail, and I called them back and they had to deal with me face to face, their manners improved considerably, and we had a real conversation. But I also believe that there is a role for the media to play on social media. They just have to get better at it. Our websites have to be better. We have to stop putting roadblocks in the way of people disseminating information. There are a lot of really smart people in our world, and I think they need to up their game. And I think it's entirely possible, especially with good information. I have hope that that can be done. There are ways to do this with niche audiences, with podcasting, with newsletters. God, I don't need to subscribe to more newsletters, but there are Substacks. But I do believe that the brain power is there. It's just that we need to get out of our own way in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, social media is obviously very good at that, and it's a force multiplier for the irresponsible. But at the same time, it's a tool that can be used by credible journalists to spread their work, to explain their work, to explain what the news organization was trying to do in putting this forward. You know, I engage with people on social media. Sometimes it goes better than at other times. It can be a leveling thing. The problem is that everybody is like, why didn't you respond to my post on Blue Sky? Just to get to Judy's point about if you call people back, they're usually much nicer. Our phone system at the Times-Union identifies the phone number in most cases that a message came from. So whenever I have a protocol for whenever anybody calls up and says, your paper sucks, you suck, you know, all you care about is this and that. And some of these are like just hateful. Yeah, right, exactly. And I will occasionally, sometimes if I think maybe this person could be saved, I will call them back and be like, oh, hi, it's Casey Seiler from the Times-Union. I think you called, but it didn't pick up the message. Did you? I didn't know what you were calling about. And the person will always be like, well, I was calling about your editorial, which I disagreed with strongly. And like, oh, tell me about that. Thank you so much. Sometimes. So, anyway.
One more question? Okay, Joe, you want to add to that?
I mean, I think, right, the answer to, I mean, we answer these questions through our work, right, I think. You know, whether it's about how to promote a more civil discourse or whatever. I think our greatest role in that is to do work that embodies that spirit. And, you know, as the victim of many victims of substandard Catholic grade school education, I always confuse the ideas of sympathy and empathy. And I'm sure you all are smart enough to know the distinction, but I've only come upon it more recently, right? And, you know, I always mistook the idea of empathy as simply you feel sorry for somebody, right? But of course it's not that. It is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Not necessarily to excuse anything or to justify it, but to imagine that experience of another. work of empathy, not sympathy, work of empathy. I think it would go a long way to, addressing the concerns of, a more civil discourse, an ability to connect with the community in a trustworthy and meaningful way. I did a story recently about the legal effort to spare the life of the young kid who had been a Parkland school shooter in Florida. You couldn't imagine a more, I think the title of the story was The Hardest Case for Mercy, and you couldn't imagine a more challenging thing, right? Could you really actually want to tell the story of this young man who slaughtered 17 kids and teachers? Anyway, I did it. It seemed to have resonated with folks. But I got a note from an old sports writing colleague of mine, and he goes, "You just it's an act of pathological empathy." I was like, that's the best compliment I ever got. So anyway, I think we answered the questions you have through our work. That's the best sort of contribution we can make.
Okay. With that, I want to be respectful of people's time. I'll pass that over just to make sure everybody can hear.
We want to give a big thank you, and let's have a round of applause for our panelists. I hope they do stick around. If you do have a couple of questions, or you just want to grab Joe's autograph, either one. I hope they stick around for a little bit just to say hi. And we lead this hopefully with some new insights. Regulate, relate, reason, right? The way we get to reason is not by talking at one another, but being able to relate to one another. And so I think that message came across loud and clear. I want to give a big thank you to Stratton Mountain Resort and the team here, Emily and the team. They've been great hosts for us this afternoon or this morning, and hopefully again, as I mentioned, come on back. Joshua and the team at Stratton Magazine and Old Mill Road. A round of applause for our sponsor there. We also like to give a quick shout out to GNAT-TV thank you for recording. As I mentioned, that'll be a recording and a link somewhere in the future, I'm sure, as well as Vermont News and Media. They were also a good supporter of this, advertising in the banner and journal. And I want to thank. This was right in the middle of a Tuesday at 10 o'clock. I'm sure all of you, have been very good at not looking at your phones and the emails coming across. So we want to thank the Bennington Banner for lending us Mike. We want to thank MCLA for lending us Dr. Carey. We want to thank a variety of people, WAE as well as New York Press Association for Judy. Casey, thank you for sparing your time over at the Times Union, and Joe for 7 days. Again, these people took time out to talk to us, and that doesn't go unnoticed, and we want to thank those publications. Again, of course, subscribe to those publications too, would be helpful as well. So with that, we're going to wrap up. Let's keep the conversation going beyond this room and in our communities, and thank you so much for showing up today. Thank you.